9, 8.
You're watching Experience Comic Culture and Sales. Streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
2, 1.
Hey everybody, it's Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and today I'm rocking my Cobra shirt, and I'm doing that for a very specific reason. There's a YouTuber that I've followed for a long time now. He's been doing content for 10 years. His name's Hooded Cobra Commander 788, or HCC 788. And today he announced he's stepping away from his YouTube channel. And that's a really hard thing for me. That's a channel that actually got me into doing YouTube content. It's one of the reasons I got into doing YouTube content. And one of the things that happened with that channel is it really built up, or at least helped solidify, the online G.I. Joe vintage community. And if you guys know me at all, you know I'm a big G.I. Joe fan. Just out of frame, there's a bunch of G.I. Joe stuff up here, and I collect G.I. Joe comics, and I talk about G.I. Joe quite a bit, and it means a lot to me. I don't completely do G.I. Joe content on my channel or anything like that, but I definitely talk about G.I. Joe a lot. I've participated in a couple of Cobra Convergence events that Hooded Cobra Commander 788 helped lead, and it really hit me harder than I expected to see his announcement video that he's stepping away from YouTube. And that's nothing new. We've seen that happening a lot. But as I was watching that video, one of the things he talked about a lot was the community that he's leaving behind. And he's a little too humble to say it, or maybe it's just not how he wanted to approach it, but he left behind a legacy of community he created. And that's interesting to me because it really had me thinking about our community, the comic book community. And if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of content creators that have left over the last year or so from our community. And not just content creators, readers, fans, people that are invested in comic books. And I think it's kind of a weird existential problem we're having in comic books right now about what is this feeling of community that's for who's left. And what does it mean to us as fans or as readers or as industry professionals? What is comic book community mean to you? What does that mean? We're going to talk about that tonight here on Devil's Advocates. Welcome back, Internet citizens. Again, I am your host, Christopher, aka the Bronze Age Nerd, and I am joined by my wonderful co-host who I pointed the right direction to this time, which
you did it wrong. You got to point the wrong direction first.
Sure, we got to go this way, and then we bring it back around. Right. It's because it's a weird eclipse day. You know, everything's all messed up. So we'll get that right next time. Don't worry. And by get it right, I mean get it wrong. But hey, Kyle, how's it going today?
Yeah, we can't brand it if you point the right direction, dude.
It's a special Easter egg episode.
No, it's been a long, stressful day.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah, well, I mean, and like I was in totality, and like I wanted nothing more than to enjoy an herbal infusion and put on Dark Side of the Moon and stare at the sky. But like I had to work. So I just got to stare at the sky.
I did hear you had a music sync up moment that happened though, right?
I did. I listened to Dark Side of the Moon, don't get me wrong, but I listen to that about every Monday. So
there you go.
You know, yeah, no, it's been one of those days. It's just been a weird day, man. And we're coming in here and we're going to talk about a topic that has been, you and I have had lots of conversations around.
Yeah.
And this topic, I mean, if we want to just jump into it here a little bit, this topic is one that kind of came from me. And should I just jump in and kind of tell the story?
Yeah, well, I mean, but before you get to that, I just want to point out I think that what you're talking about, what I kind of alluded to in the opening there, I think a lot of people will end up relating to this topic. So chat, as you're in there watching, if you're watching IG, YouTube, Twitch, X, Facebook, wherever you're watching, please do make sure to put your comments in the chat. Do keep in mind that as Kyle and I talk, we tend to circle back to those comments a little later on in the show, but we are 100% inspired and helped out by your comments in the chat. So feel free to share your feelings on this too, because I have a feeling a lot of you can relate on on this kind of problem I was talking about in the opening. Kyle, where does, why are we here today? What brought us here today? Like, what are you feeling, man?
Well, so a big part of where this conversation came from stems from what you were talking about, right? Seeing an exodus of people from the community, but it caused me to ask a question, and then some things in my own life started to happen that caused me to ask it again, which is, what exactly is the comic community? Because I don't feel like it's one community anymore. It used to feel like there was, and this is especially pre-pandemic times, right? There
Okay.
was kind of a universal comic community, and then inside of the comics community, there were like micro groups, right? Like, so I'm in the Midwest, so I was part of the overall comics community. I had friends who were comics people in California and Texas and the Pacific Northwest and in the middle of the country and on everywhere.
Yeah.
But I was part of a Midwest group of people who saw each other at every convention, who ran into each other at the local comic shop, who, frequented each other. And when the pandemic hit, that kind of went like this, right? It kind of went away with the need to go on the internet and sort of a globalization thing.
Right.
But then at the same time, we've been doing this show for a little over a year now, you and I, which is wild.
Actually, you just blew my mind, because I thought it'd been like 6 to 8 months.
No. Mainly because we became Facebook friends a year ago this past week.
Wow. So yeah, that's when we would have first started like connecting and talking about it. That's crazy.
Right. We've been doing this show for a year. And the thing that I've noticed in kind of our conversations and then comments that I see in the chat and comments that come in after is that where I exist in the comic book community isn't where most of our chat and most of our comments exist in the comic community.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that in particular is that I will often voice an opinion or a fact that is true of retailers or people who exist in the comic community the way I do, and be met with quite a lot of pushback from people because my opinions don't seem valid to a part of this community. My opinions don't seem relevant to part of this community. Whatever. And it got me to thinking, I could be wrong, they could be wrong. I'm not assigning right or wrong to this. But is this a factor of my place in the community changing? The only job I haven't done in comics is as a publisher. I've done even some creative work. It's been very minimal, but I've done some. I've done, logo and layout design for comic books. I've been a retailer. I've been a fan. I've been a broadcaster. I've been a pundit. I've done it all with the exception of publishing. And I work with publishers every day. So it got me thinking, is my place in the community transitioning? Are the opinions that I hold as a former retailer or an active retailer, an active seller, a creative, this kind of thing, different from the opinions held by the mass of the community? And so it got me to thinking, well, what the hell is our community? If everybody doesn't get to come to the table with their opinions being equally valid, are there different communities, and should we be segmenting more to only interact with our communities? And in order to answer that question, we kind of have to define what is the comic book community.
Yeah. There's one other element here, and I was curious if you were going to bring it up, because we kind of left this segment as Kyle kind of explains his situation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's good, actually. There's one other kind of element here and I know you're aware of this. I was curious if it was going to come into your explanation here. I wonder, like, as I was thinking about this through your lens, or trying to think about it through your lens, and I think, again, I think a lot of people feel that way. So it's kind of one of those positions I want to understand. One of the things that became apparent to me is I had a hard time thinking of any community that wouldn't have this going on in 2024 to some extent.
Correct. No,
Because
that's absolutely right.
yeah, there's so much that plays into that, as far as online behavior, personalities. I think internet plays a huge part in this. This feeling that some people have, and it makes me wonder, what does you, as we I guess here's the point I should make, as we try to talk about defining what is the community, or the different facets of the community. We also need to take into account that there are going to be fractures because of those differences of opinion that people seem to have. This is my opinion, they seem to have it about everything now.
Right.
And it's just so, and good, good in one hand, because we want different opinions, we want different views. But there's also like a need to sort of us versus them, and attack other opinions. And that is the real problem in my perspective. Like, it's okay to have that talk, have that debate, have that discussion about what's right, what's wrong, about, hey, is it okay to have this opinion about something, or is it not okay? But when you start basically like automatically assuming that your position is correct and other people's positions are wrong, that's where we get into that kind of headbutting territory, I feel like.
Well, and
yeah.
I can point to the minute this started. Believe it or not.
Okay.
We were on the show and we were doing the retail health check.
Yeah.
And I said on the air to you and to everyone watching, sometimes when a retailer tells you to mind your business, you need to mind your business. And a lot of people came back with, well, then I just wouldn't shop there anymore. And what I really wanted to say was, good, leave, don't need you. Because the reality is that a retailer's business is a retailer's business, right? What I do to put food on my table as a retailer does not affect you, and you don't have the right to know what I'm doing to put food on my table. That is not, if I choose to sell you a book and that means I get to eat top ramen for dinner tonight instead of the crackers that I've had in the cabinet for 6 months, then I made the right decision. Even if that means I have to hurt somebody later down the road. That was the moment that this started. And the reason it started is because I walked away from that conversation going, well, as much as I would stand by that statement to the end of the earth, they're right too.
Yeah.
And that got me thinking about, okay, there are different segments of this community with different values, in terms of what they want from it, in terms of how they approach it.
Yeah.
Right. And that is really what started spinning in my head. And I think it was a week later I said to you, I don't think I'm part of the same comic community you are. And it's been a point of friction as we plan the shows, as we talk about stuff, because I approach things from a very different sort of view.
Yeah.
Very different sort of perspective than a lot of other people. And so it's come up a few other times, but I think it would go a long way towards saying, towards helping everybody, if we could kind of say, as a comic community, these are kind of the segments you fall into, or, hey, this is how we need to treat other people with different opinions than us, or all this kind of stuff. And it goes back to kind of defining what a community is and defining what this particular community is.
For sure. And, I just totally want to thank you for sharing your perspective, because I'm somebody who, like, I want to hear other perspectives. I don't often get other perspectives like yours. So it's really fascinating to hear your perspective a lot of times. The reason I do that, by the way, for people wondering out in chat, I want to know all the different perspectives so I can have a well-rounded understanding and not just assume that I'm right all the time and live in an echo chamber. I know there's some charged words these days, but that's actually like something I believe my entire life, is that it's important to seek out other. It's almost like the scientific method, I guess, in a backwards way. Seek out other possible truths. And if I can put those up against my own beliefs and my belief still wins, great. Then I've just tested my own belief and made it that much stronger, and I understand other people better. If the other belief actually turns out to be something now I believe more, awesome. I've grown as a person and I've accepted a new belief, and I can learn something different and be part of a greater whole there. But one thing that is interesting to me, and this is where I have to kind of share my side of the story, is I actually, so until pretty much I started my channel, I did not believe that I belonged to a comic book community at all. My comic book community consisted of two, and I know that's not technically true depending on how you look at it, but from my own perspective, my comic book community was my friend Tyler growing up, who was the only guy I knew that read comic books, that was willing to talk to me about it anyway. And he was my community, my one friend that was into comic books and collected them regularly like I did. And I guess my LCS, who I had if you followed my channel and you watched one of my most popular videos, I had a very contentious relationship with my LCS just because he was a strange guy growing up. And I actually had two LCSs, and one of them was an amazing, welcoming place. Unfortunately, they shut down in the 90s, like a lot of comic shops did. The other one stuck around forever. So it's weird for me because I'm new to this idea of comic book community. So for me, you know, I was isolated physically. I didn't talk about comic books online with other people. I read them. Occasionally I would browse a forum looking for like ideas for new stories to read, and that's about it. Didn't go to conventions very often, very rarely. So this is all kind of a new thing to me. And so it's great to hear your perspective.
As a just opposite side of that, my comic book life has never existed without community. I got into it because my father and grandfather were collectors. So I had a built-in community day one. And then I started going to, when I was old enough to cross the street on my bike, like we're talking that age, right? Like 6 or 7, I could ride my bike to the LCS. And those dudes not only introduced me to so many great comics, but taught me Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. And so immediately I was in a community as a fan. Then as I got older and started doing stuff, that all changed, right? I sort of transitioned from fan into comic book professional. I studied graphic design. I studied a lot of, that kind of stuff, and started doing layout work for my friends who made comics and like logo design and cover art. Hell, I just Honoree's Kickstarter that's running right now. Fabrice Sapolsky did the cover, but I was there. Hey, can you look at this and give us feedback, guy? Like I edited the cover. And then I transitioned years later into selling, into being a retailer, into being a con dealer, into being and that came with a community in and of itself, right? So it was community of fans, community of creators, community as a whole, as a seller. And then the pandemic hits and the world shrinks but expands at the same time.
Yeah.
And so since the pandemic, I've been doing this. So my community has gotten bigger, but I'm not necessarily a creative anymore. I'm not really doing a lot of that layout work. I'm not really a retailer. I'm selling at some conventions, but I don't have a brick and mortar because I'll just be honest, in my area, real estate's too freaking expensive to invest in. I mean, I'm not going to rent a space that's 3 times more expensive than it should be, right? Just so I can have a brick and mortar.
It's a good way to go out of business.
Right. And I'm not a publisher. I'm just a guy. I'm still a fan, but my fandom is colored by the fact that I work with publishers every day. I work with creators every day. You know, I work with retailers every day. So if you draw a Venn diagram, it's 4 circles and I'm right in the middle. And so trying to define what those circles are, you know, is super confusing and super hard.
Yeah.
And so like a Comics Journey is over here going, what community, and the community is keeping me out. And I get that feeling, man. I don't think it's necessarily accurate. I think it probably has a lot to do with you just haven't found your community yet.
Well,
right?
time out for that, because that
You haven't found your community yet, because I know Comics Journey has a community.
He built his own community, man, and that's
right.
part of the trick there. And that's a lot of people won't know that, so I had to point that out, because he definitely he kind of did almost like a Breakfast Club thing, right, where he built his own community on his channel, and now he has these late night Insomniac hangout streams over there. I've been on them before. A lot of interesting random people have popped up on those streams, and a lot of regulars pop up on those streams, and that's kind of the thing here. So, I think that's definitely a through line you'll see, is that community is what you make it. And I do know that one thing that we are going to get to is we are going to get to kind of describing, like, this is my own crappy explanation that's going to come up soon here. It's going to be talking a little bit about what we trying to delineate what those comic book community circles look like a little bit. But this is where I will really need your help, because I was doing this just trying to figure out like what I really think is true. And it's kind of a hard topic to peg down. And I think that's where some of the issues come into play here. So I do know we're going to be taking a break here. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about what those comic book circles look like. Again, I'll offer what my suggestions are of what I think some of the circles of that Venn diagram are, although there's a lot of carryover. But I'm really curious to see what everyone in chat's opinions are as well.
I just had a really funny thought, especially because it's eclipse day, that the circles are more the eclipse, like it's the big circles in the middle are really kind of the thing, and the outer fringes are a little smaller. But as Bron said, we need to take our first break. But before we do, I want to remind everybody of a few things happening here on the channel. First things first, if you like the new branding, you like the new spots, you like the new stuff we're doing, give JD and Jay some love. Last Tuesday, after we went off the air, the three of us rebuilt this entire system with all that new advertising. We're working on new branding for a lot of things. So if you see something you like, shout it out. It goes a long way towards helping with the morale of the nerds in windowless rooms that run this thing. Second thing, we have some really cool content coming up this week, including some new Jam comic shows where they have some killer stuff. But Jam has been helping out Fat Jack's Comic Crypt. If you've been around for any time at all, you know that Fat Jack's has gone through a little bit of a struggle since COVID ended. And Jam has been helping them out. And as a result, they're teaming up. Starting the last Saturday in April 28th, Fat Jack's is moving from its historical Sunday night time slot to Saturday afternoons, leading into Jam Comics, so that they can work together on that. And it's going to be really good. So mark your calendars for Saturday, April 28th at, Jay, is it 4:30? 4? Jay will tell me. But Fat Jack's Comic Crypt moving to Saturday nights, starting the Fat Jam Saturdays. I really do want to call it ECW Saturdays, which is a wrestling thing, because they're both Philly or Philly adjacent, but well, that's a whole other thing. So, but Saturdays starting April 28th are going to be insane here on The Experience. So circle it, big red circles on your calendar. Let everybody know to show up that day. So I talked way longer than I should have going into that break. So let's just have our break, and we'll be back in just a minute. What do you call the place on Spider-Man's wrists where the webs come out? His website. I hate myself for writing that joke, but you'd make me feel so much better if you just visited our website. We have links to our merch, new release lists, all the show info, and so much more. TheEXPLive.com. We know you probably get a lot of emails, but could you please make sure to sign up for our mailing list? We don't send a lot of emails, and we try not to bother you. We just want to give you the best information about all the cool stuff that's going on around here. Sign up on our website, TheEXPLive.com. In a world where you hit like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, that'd be really great. Thanks. Welcome back in, everybody. This is the Devil's Advocates. I am producer Kyle, and that is Bronze Age Nerd. We are discussing the comic book community and what the comic book community means. And I am thoroughly confused by so much right now.
I think there's a lot of insomnomaniacs is what I'll call it going on in the chat.
I'm one. I'll be honest, CJ, I almost can never watch while you're doing it live because I'm usually animating or working on something around here. But I usually watch the next day. I watch a lot of YouTube the next day. But ever since we were on the show together, I think it was your show that CJ came on when we were talking about a scam or something. Ever since then, man, I love your channel. So. Yeah,
right on, man. Yeah, and it's I guess it's kind of brilliant right now that we have comic community happening in our chat as we're talking about the comic community. That's perfect. Couldn't ask for anything better. And I also want to just really quick mention something that Papa said about I think it was Papa. Nope, sorry. My apologies. It's so hard because they're copying each other so much. It was CJ. The community. It's a community of various cliques. And I think that's a very interesting thing to say, a very interesting thing to look at. And it will come up in one of the Venn diagram circles that I was going to talk about. So if you remember before the break, we talked about how we're going to kind of discuss what some of the different segments of the comic book community are as identified by me in a really slapdash fashion as I was trying to think about it. And I'm weird about how I classify things. So I may have been the weirdest person to take on this assignment in terms of what I think these different circles of people in the community are. As I read them out to you, as we talk about them, keep in mind that I don't think that the trick is I don't think anybody belongs in just one circle usually. They usually belong in more than one of these circles. And so thinking about it in terms of Venn diagram, I think is very helpful. The first group, I think it's primarily anybody that's interested in comics for the most part. They either were part of this group, they are part of this group, or they have a love-hate relationship with this part of the group. And that's just what I would call readers. And you could say fans, but I'm actually going to talk about fans a little bit later on. For me, readers are those people that actually read comic books, or again, used to read comic books, or will only read vintage comic books. It doesn't matter. You don't have to currently be reading comic books. People that are interested in comic books, but they don't have any other main outlet or source of a place to talk about their comic books other than other places where they'll interact with other community members. And that could be like an LCS, that could be like a con, that could be online, YouTube chats. It could be a lot of different places, right? But primarily it's most of us. Most of us belong to that circle because even those of us that, there's a lot of people that they like the glory days of comics and they think comics used to be better and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of people who only read certain types of comic books now, like they only read indie comic books, or they only read Kickstarters, or they only support, different types of creators that they like. But those are still readers. And so that's where this group comes to me as being like kind of the largest, most basic identifiable group. Any thoughts on that one, Kyle?
No.
Okay.
Well, and here's what I mean is that I'm trying to digest exactly what you just said in a way
Fair.
that I'm trying to figure out, okay, what part of that am I? Right? Like, if you guys haven't realized, chat, this is therapy tonight. Like, I can't afford my therapist this week, so this is therapy. No,
I've filled those shoes more than once, so it's nothing new for me.
but no, it's I think you're right. I think the reality of the Venn diagram analogy is that it's incorrect. It's a pie chart. It's something else, right?
Maybe that's a better way to put it.
Yeah, nobody comes to this industry or comes to be part of this without a love for it. It's why I call them fans, right? Like, even if, like, I know a ton of creators who aren't actively reading comics because, to be quite honest, they're scared they're going to steal somebody else's story or idea, right? They're not reading simply because that way lies plagiarism for them. You know, they read old stuff or they read, interesting things that they hear about, but by and large, they're not reading.
Yeah.
So I like to call that first big circle fans. And then everything else comes inside of that circle, right?
Yeah.
And that's where we start to get confusing. We start to get awkward, right? It's data slicing. It's slicing of people in terms of where do they slide in. So like I said, I call them fans. Readers is a good term for them. In high school when, people made fun of us, there was the nerd circle, whatever.
Yeah. I will say that I actually, so like I mentioned when I was explaining it, I actually do have, Kyle has a leg up because he can see my notes. I actually do have fans in a different category. Well, you might not be looking at it, but you could have, is what I'm saying. I'm just pointing it out. But I actually do have fans coming up later on. And this to me is, until I get to the end, I guess it won't make sense and why I think of it as a Venn diagram. Pie chart for each person might be a good way to look at it too. I acknowledge that. But that's like the most boring and hard to explain one for me. I totally understand why somebody would say, like, I think of it as fans, or whatever you want to call it. But like I said, I think it'll make sense when I get to the end of my list. And you hit on a couple of them. I hit on a couple of them. So I'll kind of just go through it a little bit quicker so we can kind of get the idea of what I was talking about. The second group would be artists, writers, in other words, comic book creators. And I don't mean comic book content creators as in like online content creators, people who are actually in the business of making comics. And publishers, industry pros. I know that there's, I could definitely see the argument for splitting this up into smaller groups in that section for sure. To me, though, in the there's going to be a lot of crosstalk. There's going to be a lot of carryover. A lot of I can just tell from social media connections, a lot of those people are connected with each other. So for me, I'm kind of making that one group. I can completely understand the argument for making that separate groups. And again, we can kind of go back through this, but I just want to get through the list so we kind of have a basic understanding of where I'm coming from with everybody. The third group would be social media creators. It's kind of what we're doing. People that it doesn't have to be in like they have their own channel or they have their own outlet in some way. You could make posts on Reddit, and you could make like discussion posts on comics on Reddit, and that fosters a community and communication. You could make posts on your Instagram feed that are, you do themed posts every day of the week, or you make regular posts that foster discussion. You could also have your own channel, have your own podcast, have your own show. There is kind of that community as well. And there's also the people that follow those people as well. Just like there's the people that follow writers, creators, publishers, companies, that kind of thing too. And then the next group, and again, we'll go back through this in a second. The next group you get to is, I kind of lump these next two as like kind of the physical location groups. And that's your LCS, or your local comic book community that's local to you. And the reason why this is a powerful one to me is because a lot of discussions happen inside an LCS between not just the shop owners and the employees and the customers, but also between customers. That there's a lot of connections that can be made there. A lot of friendships that I've met people that have that's how they're generally talking about comics every week to people. And it's also because you're generally going to be physically close to each other. you might go and see, a movie, like a Marvel movie or DC movie or whatever with those people. You might go to a comic con with those people or a comic swap, or you might go, swap meet crawling or flea markets or that kind of stuff, where you go to look for comic books or talk about comic books, or you just start hanging out outside of the LCS because you're so close to them and playing games or doing whatever, right? You become friends with these people. That is in some ways a real community for a lot of people beyond just comic books. And that's really cool. I've always been jealous of that too, because I know a lot of you out there enjoy that kind of stuff, and I've never been able to. And along with that is kind of the con scene and circuit. And I would put that in with people that travel with cons. You have a lot of vendors that go around from con to con. By the way, in the last group, I'm also including retailers. Even if you're an online retailer, I'll kind of somewhat put you in that group too, even though it's not a physical location. So all that to say, the last group to me is fans. And the reason why that's the last group, the reason why it's not the same as readers or any of these other groups, and the reason why you could be in more than one, or you could have different percentages of each of these things, however you want to look at it, is because there's all these people out there that know who Superman is. They know who Batman is. They know who the X-Men are. They know who Thor is. They know who Iron Man is. They read comics when they were a kid. They don't read them anymore, but they still like comic book characters. They're the people that when I was a kid, I mentioned I had one friend, Tyler, and we would talk about comic books and we collected them. Everybody else made fun of us. I'm from that era, right? Where I was made fun of for reading comic books, or that was a nerdy or geeky thing, right? There's a lot of people out there now that don't feel that way. Like they're, you're the nerdy friend I'll ask about the movie that came out and I don't understand what happened. There's a lot of people that are more acceptable to that type of thing now. And there's people that didn't, maybe they loved comic books and they fell out of love with them for some reason, but they still have the nostalgia for the old comic books. So even some comic book collectors would fall into this group for me, but that's kind of like the way I looked at it. So now we could go back and talk about all those things, but that's kind of my overview of my little Venn diagram thing there, why I believe you could belong to more than one. Like you could hang out at your LCS, you could read comic books, you could be a fan, and you could go to cons. You could be a part of all those groups. You might identify with one more than the other, but you also still truly are a part of those groups.
Yeah, and I think where this topic lies for me, right, is it's what I said at the beginning. I fit into literally every one of those categories, which in the end leaves you alone on an island in a way. And what I mean by that is, like, there's this idea of if you're a social media creator and you're a retailer, okay, that's a thing. If you're a social media creator and you do cons, that's a thing. If you're a reader and a fan, that's a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these are really great categories that you set up. Like, I think they're very good for the bulk of the industry, right? There might be as few as 10 of us who are like me and who are part of everything, right? In that regard. And what that I think means, and it's where some of this has come from, is
I'm laughing at chat, not you, by the way.
Oh, believe me, I just read Intellectual Fart Machine, and I'm going, I need to make a t-shirt. By the way, I'm making a t-shirt that says Intellectual Fart Machine. It's happening. It's
Intellectual theft fart machine.
And then on the back, I'll put, I stole this intellectual property. Anyway, but it's this idea of the things that interest me about comics these days aren't necessarily interesting to the masses.
Yeah.
Right. You and I had a long conversation about, I am right now hugely focused on the comic book data problem that professionals in the industry, which is the one thing that maybe isn't necessarily here so clearly, right?
Yeah.
Is a place for industry professionals who aren't retailers, who aren't necessarily con people, who aren't, you know, whatever, but they're professional. They work in this industry. The guys who program point of sale systems, the people who run the trade organizations, the people who are in this industry who work for distributors, right? There's a level of comic book professional that doesn't necessarily, their subsection isn't necessarily here, right? They fit in the readers and the fans category, and they might fit some of the others. But, there's this. So the things that interest me or that interest people like me maybe don't interest you or people in chat.
Yeah.
And so that leads to this need for another bubble. And it's probably the smallest. And I'll say it because it's where I live, but it might be most significant. Because it's the wheel that turns all the other wheels. If the professionals who make sure the comics get to stores on time and who, make sure that the publishers are talking to each other and who are making sure your retailer can sell you the books in an efficient way that keeps them in business and stop, all of a sudden the industry starts to crumble. And we saw that when we went from having just Diamond to Diamond and Lunar and Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster and Emerald City and all of these other comic distributors that people have to use now. Because one person chose to stop, it threw the whole industry into chaos. And I'm not saying that I have that ability, but it's the one category that's not here.
That's interesting.
The other category.
Yeah, but is it really an other category, or is it really?
Well, I'm calling it the other category because I don't know what to call it.
No, I know, but when you say other, I think a lot of people just kind of assume maybe a synonym with miscellaneous. But I think that it is another category as far as they just might be very niche parts of the community.
Right.
At least as viewed by most of the community.
Right.
And again, that doesn't mean unimportant. That doesn't mean, that there's not significance there. I'm actually curious a little bit, like what exactly. So to me, there's a distribution network thing there, which comes, a lot of that would be distributors, which I guess in my circle, I lumped in with industry pros, but you could definitely make an argument that that's a different, you could probably almost say like artists and writers, as in the creative teams that work on comic books, and then publishers and distributors. It could kind of almost be its own thing, their own things. But you mentioned like data experts, and I know a little bit about what you're talking about because we've talked behind the scenes, but like how many like people do you think we're really talking about in terms of who isn't being represented in those groups? I mean, are you going down to like the level of like the UPS guy that drops off your comics?
It might be as few as 10 of us.
Okay.
Right? Like that's what I'm saying. When we talk about the overall community, we all fall into it somewhere.
Oh, totally.
But when we start to really segment down into who each person is, and where each person falls, you start to get these really small little circles. And when you have somebody like myself who comes on the internet a few times a week and talks to people about comics, who falls into that microscopic part of this, all of a sudden they feel it tends to be a very isolated feeling. And it's,
For sure.
I'm going to skip ahead on our notes here. You talk about the tribalism in comics, the us versus them. Us versus them a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Not because I think you're wrong, but because I want you to understand that what I know is disproving something, or is providing contra evidence, or is providing proof that what you're saying is right, but you're not seeing the whole picture. Right? And so that's kind of, again, we're back at the heart of this thing. But when I saw tribalism on here, I went, that's it. How do we, as members of a given circle, a given group, move past the us versus them? you see it all the time in the professional circles. It's retailers versus publishers, and the distributors are in the middle, or it's retailers versus distributors, and the people who lose is the fans.
Yeah.
It's conventions versus local comic shops. It's conventions versus convention dealers. It's fans versus conventions. How do we move as a whole past the us versus them and into this sort of, hey, guys, it's a symbiotic relationship. To go back to that original point that I made, because we're running out of time here, the night that I said, hey, you need to mind your business, and a lot of people didn't like that. If you mind your business, that means your retailer gets to eat. Do you really not want your retailer to make an extra buck today by doing something that, you know, you might feel is a little unethical, but your retailer's just doing what they have to do? Because that's not symbiotic. But at the same time, retailers should be, in a way, being more accountable for those actions, like y'all were kind of pointing out. There's an accountability level that needs to exist. So to move past the tribalism into a rising tide raises all ships sort of world, what do we as a community need to do? And this is for the chat. What do I, as a me on this show, need to do?
Yeah, and it's a question for the chat, but the one thing I'll throw out about this, and I'm really curious to see what chat says. Please do type that out. The question that kind of I wonder about, and again, I know there's people that they don't have your specific set of conundrums here, but there are a lot of people that feel this way about their situation with comic books right now from various different circles we talked about. And some are in your group, I'm sure, but I mean, in other groups as well. And I think that a big problem is identification, identifying with a group or feeling accepted and wanted with a group. That's an important part of community. You can't just raise a banner up and be part of a certain part of a community and actually be truly part of it until you're seen and recognized. And I again, I'm not specifically talking about you here, but I am talking about people that I know that are kind of in this situation where that is a problem for them, is that that tribalism often comes from wanting to be accepted and wanting to be seen as a member of that team, a member of that group, and have your feelings validated, have your safe place to say your own thoughts and have people agree with you, or maybe have that conversation with you at least. And if that's ever taken away, or you don't feel like you belong to that can be really troubling for a lot of people. Like I mentioned, this is all newish territory for me over the last few years, because before I did not really feel like I was part of a community. Now I would argue that I actually was part of a community, but I definitely never, like, if you asked me 10 years ago, are you part of a comic book community? I would go, no, like I'm an island out here. I just read comic books and collect them. And, I didn't sell comic books. I didn't, I just didn't have those interactions with people. And now that I am part of a community, and I've kind of in some ways built my own community, it's something that I definitely think about more is, what is the legacy of that? Is it welcoming? Is it going to be inclusive for other groups, in spirit, if not in identity? Like, we don't necessarily have to adopt the beliefs of these other groups, but we have to be willing to accept them and be willing to be a home for people that are looking for their own home in the community too. I think that's a big part of it. I think that's kind of like, we'll get to the comments that are rolling through in chat here in a second before we wrap up. But that is kind of my parting word is, if you're part of a community out there, be willing to be accepting new members coming in that maybe aren't who you're used to, that are looking for a home, looking for a place in that community, instead of being like, well, how do you feel about so-and-so? Because if you don't feel the same way I feel, get out of here. That's kind of where I settle on that.
Yeah, no. And for me, and again, this is again, I'm trying to work through some stuff, and so we'll hit the comments here real fast. I think they're overall, and it's something that CJ said, right? Everybody thinks they're more right than each other. Which is funny. And
Yeah.
again, I'm making a t-shirt. I'll just send it to CJ and he can just have it. You have to accept that sometimes people are speaking from a place of experience and truth that is different from your experience and truth. And that they're not trying to be antagonistic, even if they come across as antagonistic. Oftentimes I feel like I'm trying to defend my corner of the world, as it were, my circle, and it's met with resistance and hostility, not because what I'm saying is untrue, but because what I'm saying isn't being considered along with what other people know. And I hear this from people who do other things, right? Not just me doing comic books, but my sister who's in the medical field, or
Mhm.
I have another friend who's a sales, a real estate broker, right? When they come to the table with something and get summarily dismissed by, he deals in commercial real estate, gets summarily dismissed by people who are selling houses to people. Now all of a sudden he's got to defend his stances, and you can't have a conversation about how it can all work together. How what's working in commercial real estate might also work in residential real estate, or what's working in residential real estate might work in commercial real estate, or what works in addiction medicine might work in, family medicine, or vice versa. What works for retailers and distributors and publishers and, the professional end of this might also be relevant to the fans in terms of explaining fan experiences and understanding why fans are going through the stuff they're going through. Because if you understand what's going on the other side of the table, it makes things clearer. But at the same time, understanding what fans are looking for will help the other side of the table more fully be able to treat them. So let's hit the comments, man. We got to get out of here. You have a show coming up in a few
I've got
minutes.
a show in like half an hour that I gotta be on. So
Yeah.
There's one comment that I have to hit first.
Mhm.
It's sticking out to me like a watchtower here. K-pop junkie says YouTube, however, there are way too many. I think too many probably is what she meant. Boys clubs that will not let ladies in, and that is actually a really good point. Something that two dudes on here can't really address properly, and so I'm really glad she brought it up. But that's a very, very good point, because I'm a husband to a wonderful woman who loves nerd culture and comics, and I'm a father to a young girl who's growing up, and it's something that I've seen my entire life is comic book people, and honestly a lot of nerd culture tends to treat women in a very interesting way that's all I'll say about it right now, because it's a very, very large topic. But yeah, welcome people into your groups, people. When I'm talking about accepting people, that's a huge part of what I meant. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, K-pop.
Mm-hmm. There were some other things, that are worth, mentioning here. One of them, right here, just be honest and don't take advantage of people, for sure. Honesty and sincerity and authenticity is super important. But at the same time, when you see someone being honest and authentic, don't kick them.
Yeah.
If somebody's being honest and authentic with you, you have to accept their honesty and their authenticity. You can't argue their honesty. Even if you disagree with it, you have to accept it and then provide your points. I never felt like I belonged in a structure that existed. I needed to put myself out there and not worry about belonging and just do my thing. And by osmosis, like-minded individuals gravitated to it. again, that's that authenticity thing, right? Just being yourself and putting it out there and seeing what happens. You know, if you don't put it out there, you'll never know. So
yeah, there's one other comment from Beyond Wednesdays that I wanted to bring up, which is that human nature is jealousy, envy, greed, pettiness, etc. As we get older, we learn about these traits and how they don't help. That's actually a really good point that I think is important. Is it's kind of what I was talking about with that accepting. It goes back to K-pop's comment. There's a lot of these, and it's also about the tribalism piece. There's a lot of these reasons why we exclude others, or why we, like what Kyle's saying here, when somebody is showing you that honesty and that earnestness, you have to listen to it and accept it, even if you don't agree with it. Accept that that's their view, and if you don't agree with it, try to have that conversation with them to offer your opinion. But understand that at the end of the day, your opinion doesn't automatically need to become somebody else's opinion either.
right.
We are made better by having multiple opinions out there. And if you are willing to accept multiple people's opinions out there, you're going to be better off for it, in my opinion.
And that's the point of this show.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, right? Bronze and I like each other. We get along pretty well. We have fun doing this. But at the end of the day, he comes from a different place in this business and in this fandom than I do.
Yeah.
And we both likely come from different places than you do in the chat. So when we come up with these topics, when we talk about these things, we might argue, but the idea is that we're having a conversation, right? At the end of the day, at the end of the show, we should be able to walk away and say, you know what? That thing, like I had that first night, right? That night that I've talked about several times. I know I'm right because I've lived my life and I have the empirical evidence to prove it. But there is right on the other side as well that I need to incorporate into mine. And we all come away with a higher level of understanding and a higher appreciation for the everyday way that this whole thing runs. Comic Journey, I'm going to argue with you. You do have to accept other opinions. You have to accept that other people have other opinions. You don't have to subscribe to them, but you have to
you don't
accept
have to adopt them.
Right. Right here.
Yeah. Yep. Well said, Derek.
Yes. So, all right. We got to get out of here because Bronze has a show in like 15 minutes. Something like that. What's your show, Bronze?
Yeah, so this is the second installment of a show that I'm doing over on my channel, Bronze Age Nerd, with my co-host, Big B McFly, the comic book guy. Last time we had Swaggle House from Swaggle House Comics on. This one we're going to be guest-free tonight, but we are talking about two very important issues. One that dominated the news cycle last week. We're going to talk about our thoughts and reflecting to a major loss in the comic book community. And the other one is clearing up something that happened with artist Sozamika recently and a situation that she had. But our show, Best Coast Comics, is primarily a positive show. We will talk about negative things, but we'll talk about how to be positive in the community and react to those things. We highlight positive things in the community, things that need attention. We'll be doing a giveaway for Jen. Comics Will Break Your Heart. It's a print we're giving away for people that donated to her GoFundMe. That's the kind of positivity we want to talk about. So even though we have negative things that might come up in the headlines, don't be afraid to tune in. It's a nice way to kind of get that West Coast chill, relaxed, accepting, peace, love kind of idea, because that's really important to us. It's something that we both believe in, and we want to spread that because both of us believe there's a lot of mental health issues in the comic book community, and we want to be able to help out with those things as much as we can in our capacity to do so. It's kind of our little corner of the comic book community.
CJ, maybe eventually what we'll do is we'll just do a mega stream. We'll do this show into that show, and we'll just keep talking for hours. But not tonight. I'm very tired.
Wow, that just blew my mind thinking about doing that.
Right. Neither of us want to, but you know it would be fun.
It'd be like the ridiculous Infinite Crisis.
Right. So before we leave, over in the chat, Jay just posted up there. If you have something you want us to dissect and talk about, you think you want our opinions on, click the link. bit.ly/Devil's Advocates, bit.ly/Devil's Advocates, and fill out the little form. Tell us what you'd like us to talk about, and we'll talk about it, because You know, we have a bunch of topics that we want to get to and we'd love to talk about, but we want to talk about things that are of interest to you. Nobody wants to hear me talk for 2 hours about metadata. Okay, there are like 4 people and they also already subscribe to a podcast that I'm a part of. So we need more people, but we'll talk about that another time. But tell us what you want to do over there in that link. Tune into Bronze's show later. I will be back tomorrow with producer Jay and Jen King for Minute to Skim It, where we review comics that are out this week. Jay picked the good ones already. Bastard. I know he's reading Uncanny Valley, which I'm very excited for. I read it Comics Pro. It's great. So check that out tomorrow here on The Experience at 7 o'clock Eastern. Head over to Bronze's channel in about, what, a 15 minutes, half hour?
It's half an hour, 28 minutes. So
28 minutes. In 28 minutes from now, if you're late, you're a loser. Be there or be square.
If you're an insomniac, you have no reason not to come.
It's true. I will be watching while I eat my dinner because I haven't eaten since noon Eastern, and I'm very hungry and I'm very tired. So we will see everybody next week here on Devil's Advocates for a little bit longer show, hopefully.
Yeah.
But we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching, everybody.
Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere The Experience is all the time.